The most frustrating thing about Pedang Tersembunyi Badai Yang Bangkit is also the thing that made me weirdly obsessed with it. It keeps daring you to crave blood, to crave dominance, to crave that classic, I will destroy everyone who wronged me, payoff, and then it stares you dead in the face and asks, very calmly, okay, but what does that actually cost you? And I'm not saying it always asks that question gracefully. Sometimes it asks it with a sledgehammer. Sometimes it whispers it in a way that hit me right in the ribs. But either way, I finished this drama feeling like I'd been in a long argument with myself about pride, love, and the kind of power that looks impressive until you have to carry it home. You're on Bongo Gaming with me, and yeah, I know, this isn't a gaming upload, but when a 2026 drama comes along and drops a whole prison to boardroom to heartbreak pipeline on my emotions, I'm not gonna pretend it didn't happen. If you end up enjoying the vibe here, consider subscribing, no pressure, just come hang out again. And before we get into it, I'm keeping spoilers moderate. I'll talk premise, tone, some major turning points and craft choices, but I'm not going to meticulously walk you through every late game reveal or step on the biggest emotional landmines. So here's the setup, clean and simple, and honestly kind of cruel in its simplicity. Xu Qiong goes to prison because he defended his girlfriend. That's it. Not because he was hunting power. Not because he was chasing status. Not because he was doing a genius criminal mastermind scheme. He makes a choice that's fundamentally emotional, protect the person he loves, and the world responds with a blunt, institutional punishment. And right away the drama is telling you what game we're playing. In this story, love isn't just soft lighting and piano music. Love is a liability. Love is evidence. Love is a sentencing guideline. Love is the thing that can ruin your life if the wrong people decide it should. The prison arc, at least in terms of concept, becomes the crucible. Xu Qiong isn't just locked up, he's forced into stillness. And stillness is where the show smuggles in its real engine, strategy. He meets Fang Tian, and Fang Tian becomes this mentor figure, but not in the inspirational poster way. It's not, believe in yourself, young man. It's, watch people, learn patterns, understand leverage, and never confuse noise for truth. There's a coldness to it that I actually appreciated, because prison mentorship in dramas can turn into this saintly wise old master routine. Here, it feels more like survival knowledge being passed hand to hand. And the reason this works, at least for me, is because it doesn't pretend strategy is sexy. It's not flashy. It's patience. It's humiliation tolerance. It's the ability to sit in discomfort and not flinch. Xu Qiong goes in as someone whose defining trait is loyalty. He takes a hit for love, and he comes out with something sharper, something more dangerous, the ability to anticipate how people will try to use him. That's not a superpower. It's a scar. If you're thinking, okay, so this becomes a revenge story, the drama absolutely toys with that expectation. Once Xu Qiong is out, he's facing old grudges, business intrigue, and power struggles that feel like they were waiting for him like a storm front on the horizon. And I want to pause on that word, storm. The title is doing a lot of work. It's not just hidden sword, like, ooh, secret badass. It's hidden sword, like a weapon you keep close because the world keeps giving you reasons to reach for it. And rising storm, like the conflict isn't one clean duel. It's weather. It's pressure systems. It's things you can't punch your way out of. Here's the first big retention test, though, because I can already hear some of you going, does it actually get good, or is it just moody setup? It gets good, but not in the way you think. The show's best strength isn't plot fireworks. It's watching a man recalibrate his soul in real time, and seeing what parts of him survived the recalibration. One of the things that surprised me early is how the drama frames Xu Qiong's initial sacrifice. A lot of series would treat, he went to prison for his girlfriend, as an automatic badge of honor, like the universe owes him happiness now. Pedang Tersembunyi Badai Yang Bangkit is harsher. It treats that choice as morally admirable and personally disastrous at the same time. And that duality matters because it becomes the template for everything that follows. You can do the right thing and still lose. You can be brave and still be punished. You can be loyal and still get eaten alive by systems that do not care why you bled. And I'm going to be honest, There was a point early on where I felt a little defensive of Xu Qiong in a way that annoyed me. Like, I caught myself wanting the drama to reward him faster. I wanted the story to pat him on the head and go, "Good boy, here's your comeback." Which is revealing, right? That's not me being noble, that's me wanting narrative comfort. The show refuses to offer that comfort consistently, and that refusal is kind of its thesis. Let's talk about Fang Tian for a second, because mentor characters can make or break this kind of story. The writing choice that works is that Fang Tian doesn't feel like he exists to make Xu Qiong special. He feels like he exists because prison produces people like him, people who learn to read the world as a set of incentives, threats, and masks. The vibe is less wise teacher and more dangerous uncle who's seen too much. And the show benefits from letting that mentorship be morally complicated. Strategy is not virtue. Strategy is a tool. You can use it to protect yourself. You can use it to hurt someone. You can use it to build a life. You can use it to burn one down. Now, I can't speak on specific performances with names beyond what we have, but I can talk about what the acting style needs to be for this to land, and I think the drama largely understands that. Xu Qiong has to be played with restraint. If he's too loud, the prison arc turns into melodrama. If he's too stoic, the romance motivation feels fake. The sweet spot is when you can see the conflict in his body before you hear it in his voice, a jaw that tightens when someone mentions the past, a half-second delay before he answers a question. The way his eyes track exits and angles like he's still in a place where safety is geometry. That kind of micro-acting is what sells Prison Changed Him, without needing a monologue every 10 minutes. And since we're on craft, the visual language has a lot of potential in a story like this, and the show uses some of it well. Even if you don't consciously clock it, you feel the difference between a contained environment where the walls are always close, and a post-release world where spaces are bigger but somehow less free. Prison is tight frames, repetition, metal, institutional light. Outside is glass, sleek offices, cars, expensive fabrics, but the threat is more abstract, smiles that don't reach the eyes, handshake politics, the way a sentence can be both compliment and warning. I like when dramas understand that leaving prison doesn't mean leaving captivity. It just means the bars become polite. Keep that in mind, because the most interesting question the show keeps poking is not, will Xu Qiong win? It's, what does winning turn him into? And when that question finally clicks for you, a bunch of earlier scenes quietly change color. There's a mini scene in the early stretch, again, I'm staying general, not pinning it to a specific episode, that captures what I mean. It's late. The prison air feels stale, like it's been breathed too many times. The light is thin and grey, not quite night, not quite morning. You hear the tiny sounds you only notice when you can't escape them, a distant cough, a drip somewhere, fabric shifting as someone turns in sleep. Xu Qiong is awake, sitting with that special kind of exhaustion where your body wants to collapse but your mind won't stop. Fang Tian is nearby, not looming, not performing, just present. And the conversation, or maybe it's more like a lesson disguised as conversation, isn't dramatic. It's almost boring. It's about patterns. About how people say one thing and mean another. About how the loudest person in the room is often the easiest to control. Fang Tian doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't deliver a cinematic mic drop. He just lays out a way of seeing. And the way Xu Qiong absorbs it is the key. You can imagine him wanting to resist, because accepting that worldview means accepting that the world is colder than he hoped. But you can also see the hunger, because if he's going to survive what's coming, he needs that coldness. The scene is quiet, but it's violent in its own way. It's the violence of a belief dying and another belief taking its place. Here's a slightly contrarian take, and I mean this respectfully because I know some viewers will be here for the corporate warfare. I think the prison to strategy arc is the most compelling part of the entire concept, and the business intrigue, while important, can't always match the intimacy of that transformation. Not because business plots are inherently boring, but because they often default into, people talk in nice rooms, and unless the writing is razor sharp, the tension diffuses. In a cell, every silence is tension. In a boardroom, silence can just be silence. This drama sometimes bridges that gap beautifully, and sometimes you can feel it working a little too hard to make paperwork feel like a knife fight. That said, when it works, it really works, because the show uses business and power as a mirror. Xu Qiong doesn't just return to normal life. He returns to a world where grudges have matured, where people have restructured their lives around his absence, and where his name carries a different weight now. And that's psychologically juicy. If you've ever had a period of your life where you disappeared, maybe not prison, obviously, but grief, illness, depression, a long stretch of being broke and embarrassed, then you know the weirdness of coming back and realizing everyone else kept living. The world didn't pause. Your story was the most important thing to you, and to everyone else it was just news. And yes, I'm about to get personal for a second, because this drama hit a nerve I didn't expect it to. The idea of making a choice out of love, and then having that choice follow you like a shadow, like a receipt you can't return, messed with me. I've had moments in my life where I did something I believed was right for someone I cared about, and later, when things got complicated, part of me wanted to scream, "Do you understand what that cost me?" Not because I regretted caring, but because being good doesn't mean you're invincible. The drama doesn't romanticize that feeling. It lets it sit there, ugly and human. And just when you think, okay, so he'll harden, he'll become a shark, the show plays another trick. It keeps letting tenderness survive in him. Not as weakness, but as a stubborn fact. Like, no matter how strategic he becomes, the reason he went down that path in the first place doesn't vanish. That creates tension because the world he's stepping into, the grudges, the power plays, does not reward tenderness. It weaponizes it against you. So every time Xu Qiong shows emotion, the question isn't, is he dumb? It's, is he choosing to stay human? If you're waiting for me to say whether I loved it or hated it, I'm not there yet, because my feelings about this drama are complicated. There are stretches where it's genuinely gripping, like you can feel the chessboard being set. And then there are stretches where the momentum wobbles, where you can tell the show wants to be both a character study and a power struggle thriller, and it occasionally has to yank itself from one lane to the other. That tug-of-war can be fascinating, but it can also be a little messy. Still, messy doesn't automatically mean bad. Sometimes messy is the texture of a story that's actually trying. One of the smartest choices is that the drama doesn't treat strategy as instant success. It would be so easy to turn Fang Qian's lessons into a montage that makes Xu Qiong unbeatable. But the more believable approach, and the one that fits the theme, is that strategy gives you options, not guarantees. If someone wants you gone, you can read their motives perfectly and still get hit. If a system is built to crush certain people, you can become a genius and still find yourself cornered. That's not pessimism. That's realism. And it makes the moments where Xu Qiong does navigate a trap feel earned rather than scripted. Also, can we talk about how prison stories often make the outside world feel like a reward? This drama has the audacity to make the outside world feel more suffocating in some ways, because now the stakes are ambiguous. In prison, the rules are brutal but clear. Outside, the rules are written in tone, implication, reputation, and money. People smile while they destroy you. People offer help that is actually a leash. People call it business, as if that word absolves them of cruelty. The show leans into that, and the atmosphere benefits. And I'm going to slip in a quick aside here because I had to laugh at myself. Every time Fang Qian drops a strategic observation, my brain immediately tries to apply it to my own life like I'm about to enter a corporate power struggle, and then I remember I can barely outmaneuver my own procrastination. Like, yes, thank you, sir, I will control the narrative, right after I control my laundry situation. The sound design deserves a mention too, because dramas like this can overdo music and turn every glance into a symphony. Pedang Tersembunyi Badai Yang Bangkit is at its best when it uses restraint, when it lets silence sit under a conversation, when it allows the clink of a cup or the hum of a fluorescent light to become the soundtrack. There's something about quiet in a power story that feels more threatening than drums. When music swells too often, you stop believing the stakes. When the show trusts stillness, you lean in. And the editing rhythm matters. The prison sections, in my ideal version of this story, should feel repetitive in a purposeful way, days blending, time thickening, the mind sharpening out of necessity. Then the post-release sections should feel faster, more fragmented, like the world is moving too quickly for Xu Qiong to catch. When the drama hits that contrast, it's immersive. When it doesn't, you feel the scene between Arc 1 and Arc 2. Now let's talk about the relationship dynamics, because the entire premise is built on a romantic catalyst. He defended his girlfriend and paid for it. The show could have easily turned her into a symbol, a reason, trophy, regret. The challenge is making her feel like a person, not just the match that lit the plot. With moderate spoilers, I'll say this: the drama is clearly aware that love, in a story about power, can't just be pretty. It has to be pressured. It has to be tested by resentment, guilt, and the simple fact that time passed. If Xu Qiong is changed by prison, and he is, then love has to face that change honestly. And that is where the writing either sings or falls apart depending on the scene. Because here's the uncomfortable truth: "I went to prison for you" is not a romantic line. Not long term. It becomes a debt. It becomes a shadow over every argument. Even if neither person wants it to be. If the drama leans into that reality, it becomes emotionally mature. If it avoids it, it becomes fantasy. The fact that this series is even positioned to wrestle with that makes me respect it, because so many dramas would rather keep love uncomplicated. This one, at least by premise, doesn't get that luxury. Here's another little hook to keep you with me: the real villain of this story might not be a person at all. It might be the way power trains you to stop trusting your own heart. And watching Xu Qiong try to hold onto love while learning suspicion is where the tension really lives. When the post-release arc expands into grudges and business intrigue, the drama steps into familiar territory, the world of alliances, betrayals, reputation, and the kind of polite hostility that makes you feel like you need a shower afterward. The success of these scenes depends on clarity. Do we understand what Xu Qiong wants right now, what he fears, what he's willing to trade? The show generally keeps his emotional through-line intact. He's not chasing power for sport, he's reacting to a world that won't let him just be. That's an important difference. Ambition stories are one thing. Survival stories masquerading as ambition are another, and they hit different. I also like that the premise implies multiple kinds of power. There's brute power, threats, force, intimidation. There's social power, connections, status, the ability to make a phone call and alter someone's life. There's economic power, resources, leverage, ownership. And then there's internal power, the ability to decide who you are when you could easily become something uglier. Xu Qiong's arc touches all of these, and that's why the strategy theme doesn't feel random. Strategy isn't just tactics, it's self-governance. It's choosing your next move when your emotions are screaming. But let me be sharp for a second, because fairness doesn't mean soft. Corporate power intrigue in dramas often collapses into the same set of scenes: confrontations in expensive rooms, veiled threats, dramatic exits. If the dialogue isn't distinctive, those scenes blur together. Pedang Tersembunyi Badai Yang Bangkit sometimes risks that blur. There are moments where you can feel the story leaning on the genre's default language instead of letting characters speak with their own specific rhythms. And when that happens, the emotional charge dips. You don't want to feel like you've stepped into business drama template number 4. You want to feel like you're watching Xu Qiong navigate a world that is uniquely hostile to him. When the writing is locked in, though, it gives you those little psychological feints that make strategy stories delicious. Someone offers help that's actually a test. Someone brings up the past not to reminisce but to measure weakness. Someone uses kindness as camouflage. Xu Qiong, trained by Fang Tian's worldview, starts noticing these traps, and the viewer gets to feel that satisfaction of pattern recognition. That's the addictive part. That's the part that makes you go, "Oh, he's learning. Oh, he's not the same man." And then, just when you're enjoying that competence, the drama undercuts it by reminding you that competence doesn't equal peace. One thing I want to highlight without overspoiling is the show's interest in revenge as a temptation rather than a goal. The premise includes revenge and grudges in the world Xu Qiong re-enters, but the story's ultimate question isn't, will he get revenge? It's, will revenge become his identity? Those are different narratives. The first is external. The second is spiritual. And I think the drama is more interested in the second, even if it occasionally dresses itself up like the first to keep the pacing punchy. And yes, that can frustrate some viewers. Some people want the clean catharsis. They want the bad guys crushed, the hero crowned, the scoreboard settled. This drama, based on where it points, seems more interested in showing that scoreboards are traps. Because you can win and still be empty. You can win and lose the person you were trying to avenge in the first place, emotionally speaking. You can win and realize you've built a cage with nicer furniture. I'm going to circle back to Xu Qiong's core trait, loyalty. Loyalty is portrayed as both his greatest beauty and his greatest vulnerability. It's what puts him in prison. It's what gives him a reason to endure prison. It's what makes him susceptible to manipulation once he's out, because loyal people can be predictable. If you know what someone loves, you know where to aim. That's a brutal idea, but it's true. The drama doesn't have to say it out loud for you to feel it. Every time Xu Qiong cares, the world around him becomes more dangerous. At the same time, the show doesn't treat loyalty as stupidity. That's important. A lesser script would turn good guy traits into naive traits just to manufacture conflict. Here, the conflict is more adult. You can be loyal and still be smart. You can be loyal and still have boundaries. You can be loyal and still choose yourself when it's necessary. Watching Xu Qiong learn that, how to love without self-erasing, is where the emotional payoff lies, more than any boardroom victory. And I have to admit, I found myself unexpectedly moved by the idea that Fang Tian's teachings might not be about turning Xu Qiong into a weapon, but about giving him a way to survive without becoming a monster. That's the best case reading of Fang Tian. And I'm not saying the show always frames him that generously. But if you lean into that interpretation, the mentor dynamic gets richer. It becomes less, teach him to dominate, and more, teach him to see clearly. Clarity can be merciful. Clarity can also be devastating. Let me throw one more question at you, because this is where the drama starts tightening its grip. If the world punishes you for loving someone, do you stop loving, or do you stop caring what the world does? The show's answer is not instant, and it shouldn't be, because if Xu Qiong changes too quickly, it's not believable. There's also a thematic layer here about class and access. Again, I'm staying general, because we don't have specifics beyond business intrigue, but that's enough to talk about the vibe. Prison and corporate power are two different institutions that control people in different ways. Prison controls your body. Corporate power controls your options. Both decide what kind of future you're allowed to have. Xu Qiong moving between those worlds is a bleak kind of education. It's like the drama is saying, you thought freedom was the opposite of prison, but it might just be another system with better branding. The cinematography, when it's intentional, underlines that. The glass and steel aesthetic of business environments often looks clean, but it's emotionally sterile. Prison looks dirty, but emotions are raw. When the show crosscuts those textures, rawness versus sterility, it creates a sense that Xu Qiong is constantly being asked to trade one kind of suffering for another. And you can see why the simple life temptation would grow in him later, even if the plot keeps pushing him into bigger conflicts. Now, because I'm keeping spoilers moderate, I'm not going to spell out every escalation. But the arc we're promised is clear. Xu Qiong comes out, and instead of getting a peaceful second chance, he gets pulled into a storm of vengeance, corporate maneuvering, and power grabs. And the pressure of that storm forces choices. Choices about who to trust. Choices about how far to go. Choices about whether the hidden sword stays hidden or comes out. The interesting part is that the hidden sword doesn't have to be literal violence. It can be a mind. It can be information. It can be the ability to stay calm while someone else loses control. Sometimes the sharpest weapon in a room is the person who doesn't need to raise their voice. Fang Tian's lessons prime Xu Qiong for that kind of warfare. And if the actor playing Xu Qiong can sell that evolution, if he can make you believe this man now hears double meanings in every sentence, then the whole post-release segment becomes more tense, because you're not just watching events, you're watching perception. I will say, though, there's a tightrope the drama has to walk, making Xu Qiong strategic without making him emotionally numb. Because the heartbeat of the premise is that he did everything for love. If he comes out and becomes a pure strategist, the story loses its origin. It becomes another, cold genius, power fantasy. The reason this drama stands out in concept is because it suggests the opposite, that love is the thing he keeps trying to protect even as he becomes more capable of destruction. That's a much harder story to write, and you can feel the show straining toward it. Sometimes that strain shows up as pacing issues. You can sense the story wanting to slow down and sit in emotional consequences, and then realizing it also has to keep the external plot moving. That tug can create scenes that feel like they are racing through feelings. Like the drama is going, yes, yes, trauma, anyway, here's the next power move. When it happens, I get annoyed, because the whole point of using prison as a formative experience is the emotional aftermath, not just the tactical upgrade. But other times, the show does something I really respect, it lets discomfort linger. It allows moments where Xu Qiong is not triumphant, not charismatic, not cool. He's just off. Like he's standing in a room that used to be familiar, and now it feels like a set built for someone else. Those moments are gold, because they are honest. They are what re-entry actually feels like, again, not specifically prison re-entry for me, obviously, but any kind of return after you've changed. You don't slide back into your old life. You bump into it. And if you're a newcomer wondering whether this drama is going to be bleak the whole time, I don't think it's pure bleakness. It has this undercurrent of hope that's not syrupy. The hope isn't everything works out. The hope is you can still choose. Even in a world of power struggles, the drama hints that choice remains, even if every option hurts. That's a mature kind of optimism, and it's the kind I personally respond to more than fairy tale happiness. One more thing about Fang Tian, I like that his presence implicitly raises questions about cycles. What made him who he is? What did he lose to become that clear-eyed? Mentors in prison stories often carry an unspoken tragedy, and the show doesn't need to spoon-feed it for you to feel it. The best mentor characters are cautionary tales as much as guides. And that's what gives Fang Tian weight. He isn't just handing Xu Qiong tools, he's showing him a possible future if he lets strategy replace love entirely. If you're still with me, here's where it gets even more interesting, because the moment Xu Qiong steps into the business power arena, he's no longer just reacting to injustice. He's in a world where morality is negotiable. And the drama starts asking whether you can stay moral in an ecosystem designed to reward the opposite, whether you can play the game without becoming the game, whether you can hold a boundary without being crushed by people who don't have one, and whether love can survive when it stops being a dreamy motivation and starts being a practical risk. And I want to linger on that last point, because it's the emotional fuse of the whole story. Love in this drama isn't just something that happened before prison. It's something that has to exist after prison, after bitterness, after strategy, after humiliation, after the taste of power. That's not romantic escapism. That's love under stress test conditions. So when Xu Qiong begins navigating grudges and intrigue, the tension isn't just, will he outsmart them? It's, will he let himself be reshaped into someone his girlfriend wouldn't recognize? And even more painful, will he reshape himself so much that he can't recognize what he wanted in the first place? That's the kind of question that turns a standard power plot into something more intimate, and the drama keeps hovering around it in a way that made me lean forward, even when the external plot got a little familiar. There's a particular emotional rhythm to stories like this. First you feel injustice, then you feel hunger for revenge, then you feel satisfaction when the hero becomes capable, and then, if the story is brave, you start feeling dread, because capability is not the same as goodness. The more capable Xu Qiong becomes, the more you start worrying about what he'll do with it, and whether the world will force his hand. And that dread is addictive, because it's not about a twist, it's about character. Also, it's worth noting how the drama uses the idea of simple life as a counterweight. Even if you don't know the ending, you can feel the gravitational pull of that concept once the storm really gets going. It's like the series is holding up two futures, the shiny, ruthless, high-stakes future where you win at the game, and the quiet future where you step away. Most dramas treat stepping away as defeat. This one, at least thematically, flirts with the idea that stepping away might be the only real victory. Not in a preachy way, more in a weary, earned way. And that's where my mixed feelings start to sharpen into something more specific. Because on paper, I love that thematic ambition. In execution, the drama sometimes struggles to keep all its plates spinning: romance, trauma, strategy, mentorship, revenge, pressure, business intrigue, and power struggle escalation. When it balances them, it feels like a storm you can hear coming. When it doesn't, you feel like you're watching two slightly different dramas trying to share the same protagonist. But I don't want to undersell how compelling Xu Qiong's premise is. A man goes to prison for love, comes out trained in strategy by a hardened mentor, and faces a world that wants to exploit, punish, or recruit him. That's a character engine that can run for a long time, because every situation becomes a test. Do you respond as the old you, the new you, or something third? And the next thing I want to talk about, because it's where the show's emotional intelligence either breaks your heart or just kind of glides past it, is how guilt operates in Xu Qiong after he's out. How the weight of "I did this for you" sits between two people even when neither of them says it out loud, and how power struggles outside prison can feel like a continuation of prison logic, just with better lighting and worse honesty, and how that feeling of continuation can be scarier than prison itself, because at least prison is honest about what it is. It doesn't pretend the cage is a favor. It doesn't dress control up as opportunity. The outside world, in this drama, has that glossy, smiling cruelty where people swear they are helping you while they are quietly steering you. And Xu Qiong, carrying guilt like a second spine, is exactly the kind of person who can get steered, because guilt makes you easy to bargain with. You'll do more than you should, accept less than you deserve, apologize when you're not the only one who should be sorry. The show understands that, and when it leans into it, it stops being just a power struggle story and starts feeling like a psychological portrait. The guilt here isn't just, "I went to prison." It's the fallout of time. It's what happens when you miss years of someone's life, even if you missed them for love. It's the kind of guilt that doesn't have a clean target. You can't punch it. You can't sue it. You can't outmaneuver it in a boardroom. You just wake up with it and you decide how to live with it. And I know that sounds soft compared to revenge and business intrigue, but that's exactly why it's effective, because it sits under the flashy stuff like a deep bass note you feel more than you hear. And if you've ever been the person who took the hit for someone else in a relationship, emotionally, financially, socially, you'll recognize the dangerous fantasy that comes with it. The fantasy is, because I suffered, I deserve a specific outcome. I deserve gratitude in a certain form. I deserve loyalty in a certain form. I deserve love that never changes. But love isn't a contract like that. People aren't vending machines. You can put sacrifice in and not get the snack you wanted. Pedang Tersembunyi Badai yang Bangkit doesn't say that to be cruel, it says it because it's true, and truth in romance writing is rare enough that I always notice it. Now, here's where the drama has to do something really delicate with the girlfriend character, because the premise puts her in a morally awkward position. If she's written as ungrateful, the audience will turn on her immediately and the romance dies. If she's written as a perfect angel who never struggles, she becomes a prop and the romance also dies, just more quietly. The only way it works is if the show allows her to have her own interiority, her own pain, her own compromises, her own anger, her own guilt. And because I'm keeping moderate spoilers, I'm not going to pretend I know the exact shape of all her choices. But I can tell you what the story needs, and what it feels like it's reaching for: a love that isn't just, she waits and he returns, but a love that has to be rebuilt on different terms, because the people involved are no longer the same. Wait, because this is the point where a lot of dramas lose me, when they treat prison time like a pause button. Like the girlfriend just sits on a shelf, sealed in plastic, untouched by life. If Pedang Tersembunyi Badai yang Bangkit avoids that trap, and it certainly seems positioned to, it earns a lot of my respect. Because the hardest truth in these stories is that the person who stayed outside also survived things. They endured their own sentence, stigma, loneliness, fear, the daily grind of missing someone while being expected to function like a normal person. If the show gives that weight, the romance becomes adult, not just romantic. And that adulthood is exactly what makes the choose love and a simple life over wealth endpoint feel thematically coherent, at least on paper. Because if you're really exploring guilt and power honestly, then wealth stops being the fantasy. Wealth becomes another kind of prison. It becomes the place where you can buy silence but not peace. You can buy distance but not safety. You can buy a new identity but not a clean conscience. So the simple life isn't about, oh, he learned to be humble. It's about opting out of a system that's designed to keep the storm going forever. But before we even get there, the show spends time making the storm tempting. That's important. Xu Qiong has to feel the pull of power in a way the audience understands, or else his final choice isn't a choice, it's just a moral lesson. And the drama does something clever by making the pull of power partially defensive. It's not just greed. It's the desire to never be helpless again. The desire to never be at someone else's mercy again. That desire is extremely human, and it's also how good people become dangerous. They don't start by wanting to be cruel. They start by wanting to be safe. And you can feel Fang Tian's influence there like an echo. Strategy, in the wrong emotional hands, becomes paranoia. It becomes a lens where every kindness is suspicious, every compliment is a trap, every offer is bait. The show plays with that tension. Does Xu Qiong learn to see clearly, or does he learn to see cynically? Those are not the same thing. Clarity can still allow hope. Cynicism is hope's graveyard. There's a visual trick the show can use, and I think it does, at least in spirit, even if viewers don't consciously articulate it. When someone is becoming paranoid or hyper-strategic, you start framing them differently. More reflections. More glass. More shots where their face is segmented by window frames, door frames, railing bars. Even outdoors, you can make someone look boxed in if you keep shooting them through things. And that's the kind of cinematography choice that makes a drama feel smarter than its plot. Because the plot might be business intrigue, but the image says, this man is trapped in his own vigilance. If you're still undecided on whether to give this drama a chance, here's the hook I'd offer. The real romance isn't just between two people. The real romance is between Xu Qiong and the idea of who he could become. And that romance is toxic as hell. Something else that kept me watching is how the series seems to treat revenge as a language people speak when they don't know how to mourn. That might sound like me getting poetic, but think about it. A grudge is often grief with armor on. It's pain that learned to stand up straight. And when Xu Qiong walks back into a world full of grudges, he's walking into a world of unprocessed hurt, some of it his, some of it other people's, some of it inherited from older conflicts and old humiliations. Revenge plots can feel cartoonish when they are just, bad guy did bad thing. They feel real when they are about humiliation and pride and the terror of being powerless. And this drama, by premise, has humiliation baked in. Prison is humiliation. Coming out and having to re-enter society is humiliation. Being pulled into a power struggle where everyone assumes they can use you is humiliation. So the temptation for Xu Qiong to humiliate others in return, whether through business victory, social dominance, or just outsmarting them, is strong. It's not about justice anymore, it's about reclaiming dignity. The series is at its best when it acknowledges how seductive that is. I want to talk about acting again, because stories like this live or die on subtlety. If Xu Qiong's performance is too heroic, the moral tension collapses. If he's too broken, the strategic arc feels unbelievable. The ideal is a man who is functional but not healed. A man who can walk into a room and control his face, but then later you see the tremor in his hand when he's alone. And I'm telling you, those little physical tells, slower blinking, the way someone holds their breath when a name is mentioned, the way their posture goes rigid around certain topics, those are the details that make a drama feel expensive even if the set isn't. And then there's Fang Tian. If Fang Tian is played too warm, he becomes a teddy bear mentor and the prison arc loses its edge. If he's played too villainous, the mentorship becomes suspicious in a melodramatic way. What you want is ambiguity. You want a man who speaks like he's giving advice, but you can't fully tell whether he's saving Xu Qiong or shaping him. That ambiguity is where the tension comes from. It's like he's handing him a knife and saying, this can cut rope or it can cut throats. Your choice. But we all know the knife doesn't stay clean. Here's something I didn't expect myself to feel. I started missing the prison sections once the story moved deeper into the outside world. That's not because I wanted more suffering or because prison is more interesting as a setting. It's because prison, paradoxically, felt more emotionally honest. Outside, everyone has masks. In prison, the mask is sometimes just toughness, but the need is visible. The outside world in this drama can sometimes feel like a maze of performance. And while that's thematically correct, power is performance, it does mean the viewer has to work harder to feel grounded. But that's also where the show's sound design can pull you back in. When a drama is about masks, you want moments where the sound drops out and you suddenly hear someone breathe. Or you hear the small click of a pen and it feels like a gun cocking. Or you hear footsteps in a hallway and it triggers a prison memory without anyone saying the word prison. Those sensory callbacks are how you keep the characters in a world alive while the plot expands outward. And speaking of inner worlds, let's sit with Xu Qiong's internal contradiction for a second, because I think it's the engine of everything. He learned strategy from Fang Tian, but his origin story is emotional, not strategic. He didn't go to prison because he calculated the odds, he went because he reacted from love. So every strategic move he makes afterward carries a faint taste of betrayal against his former self. Even if the move is necessary. Even if it's smart. He becomes the kind of man who can do what needs to be done, and that's admirable, but it's also mournful, because you can feel the innocence being traded away in real time. Now, I'm not here to moralize at you like I'm holding a candle and reading poetry. I'm here because this drama, in its best moments, is messy in a way that feels like life. And I think that's why it sticks, even when the pacing wobbles. It isn't just asking, what happens next? It's asking, who are you becoming while it happens? Let me drop another re-hook, because this is the turning point in how you'll experience the show. Once you realize that hidden sword is not revenge but restraint, you start watching every confrontation differently. Restraint is the secret weapon in a story like this. Anyone can lash out. Anyone can throw a punch. Anyone can scream in a boardroom. But the man who can stay calm, who can choose not to ruin someone even when he could, that man has real power. And it's power that doesn't poison him as fast. The drama sets Xu Qiong up to be capable of destruction, and then it makes you watch him decide whether to use that capability. That's more suspenseful than a simple, will he win, because the most unpredictable thing in the world is someone choosing decency when they don't have to. That's also why the final direction, him choosing love and a simple life over wealth, can either feel like a cop-out or like a mic drop depending on how it's earned. If the show just throws it in as a moral ending, it'll feel like it wasted your time. But if it builds the psychological cost of power with enough texture, then walking away becomes the boldest move he makes. Because walking away means you stop letting your enemies write your purpose. It means you refuse to live as a reaction. And I'll say it plainly, I'm a sucker for stories where winning looks like refusing the game. Not because I think everyone can just opt out of power structures in real life, most people can't, but because in fiction, that choice exposes something raw. What you wanted was never the throne. What you wanted was peace. What you wanted was to stop being hunted by your own anger. And when a character admits that, it's like watching someone put down a heavy bag they've been carrying for years. But I'm getting ahead of myself emotionally, because the show doesn't hand you peace early. It hands you escalation. And with escalation comes the business intrigue aspect, which, again, is a mixed bag in execution. When the intrigue is character-driven, when it's about how Xu Qiong is perceived, how trust is negotiated, how old grudges are revived, it's compelling. When it becomes more generic, power struggle, it risks blending into every other drama that thinks suits and glass offices automatically equal tension. So what makes the difference? Stakes you can feel in a human body. Not just the company, not just wealth, but what the outcome does to Xu Qiong's ability to love and sleep and breathe without scanning the room for threats. If a business confrontation doesn't tie back to his emotional survival, it becomes noise. There's also a moral geometry to these stories that the drama seems aware of. Once you start playing power games, you're tempted to justify your actions as necessary. Necessary is a dangerous word. Necessary is how people do terrible things while staying convinced they are the hero. Necessary is how cruelty becomes respectable. And Xu Qiong, having learned strategy, will constantly be offered necessity as an excuse. You have to do this. You have no choice. This is how the world works. The tension is whether he believes it. And because the drama's premise includes intrigue and power struggles, it implies a web of other characters, rivals, allies, opportunists. I'm not going to invent names or specific betrayals, but I can talk about the archetypes the show likely plays with: the person who respects Xu Qiong's strength and wants to recruit him, the person who resents his existence because it disrupts their narrative, the person who uses morality as a public performance while privately being ruthless, the person who is genuinely kind but is naive about the game. These characters matter only if they feel like individuals, not chess pieces. And the drama's writing has to do the hard work of giving them distinctive voices. When it succeeds, you get conversations that feel like duels even when nobody raises their voice. A pause becomes an insult. A compliment becomes a warning. A casual reference to the past becomes a needle under the skin. That's the delicious part of intrigue writing. And you can tell when the actors are enjoying it, too. Those little half smiles that don't mean happiness, they mean, I know something you don't. Here's a personal confession that surprised me while watching. I found myself getting anxious during quiet scenes. The ones that are supposed to be calm. Like, if Xu Qiong is sitting with someone he loves, or he's in a moment that should be safe, I couldn't relax. And that's partly because the drama trains you not to. It trains you to expect the storm. But it also hit something in me about how trauma works. Once you've learned that good moments can be interrupted by punishment, you start bracing for the interruption. Even when it doesn't come. That's not just a plot mechanic, it's a real nervous system response. And the show, intentionally or not, recreated that feeling. And if that sounds heavy, don't worry, I'm not about to turn this into a therapy channel. I'm just saying, the drama's emotional texture got under my skin in ways that flashy plot twists rarely do. Now, about structure. The prison arc is a clean beginning, cause, consequence, mentorship. The post-release arc is where the narrative becomes more sprawling, multiple conflicts, multiple motivations, an expanding world. That's a common structural move, and it makes sense, but it comes with a risk: you lose intimacy. The camera may still be on Xu Qiong, but the story becomes less about his interior life and more about external maneuvers. The best version of this drama keeps the two braided. Every maneuver should cost him something emotionally. Every victory should complicate his relationship with love. Every loss should test whether he returns to tenderness or retreats into control. And I want to give the show credit for even aiming at that. A lot of dramas would treat strategy training as a glow-up. Like, congratulations, now you're powerful and hot and everyone fears you. Pedang Tersembunyi Badai yang Bangkit, at least in spirit, treats strategy like a burden. Like a lens you can't take off. Like once you see people's motivations clearly, you can't unsee them, and that ruins certain kinds of innocence. That's a sophisticated take for a drama that could have easily gone full power fantasy. Another rehook, because this is the part that made me start arguing with the show out loud. The drama keeps asking whether love is a reason to fight, or a reason to stop fighting. And your answer to that will decide how you experience everything that follows. Most revenge-leaning dramas treat love as fuel for battle. I'll destroy them for you. This drama is flirting with the idea that love might be the thing that makes you put the sword down. That's risky, because viewers love catharsis. Viewers love punishment. Viewers love the fantasy of a righteous person becoming an unstoppable force. But real love that wants someone alive and safe, often doesn't want the battle. It wants the battle to end. And that's where the title's storm metaphor is so good. Storms don't end because you win. They end because the pressure changes. Because you move. Because you choose a different climate. Let's dig into the theme of masculinity here, because it's quietly present even in a broad premise. Xu Qiong's story is a classic masculine trap. He proves love by sacrificing himself, and then he proves survival by becoming harder, and then he proves worth by accumulating power. That's the socially approved arc. But the drama complicates it by suggesting that those proofs don't necessarily lead to happiness. They lead to more proving. More tests. More fights. More storms. And the simple life choice at the end, if earned, is basically a rejection of that proving cycle. It's a man choosing to be rather than perform. And I'm going to be gently critical again. The show has to be careful not to romanticize simple life as an aesthetic. It can't just be soft lighting and a small house and a smile. If it's real, it has to carry the weight of everything he walked away from. It has to feel like a scar that finally stopped bleeding, not like a vacation. The drama's credibility depends on that emotional truth. Now, in the midsection of a drama like this, what I call the storm thickening, you usually get a rhythm of confrontations and counter moves. This is where editing and pacing are crucial. Too slow, and you feel like you're watching people talk around the point. Too fast, and you don't feel the consequences. The best pacing gives you time to process a moral compromise before the next one arrives. Because if Shu Qiong makes 3 compromises in a row without any emotional digestion, he starts feeling less like a person and more like a plot machine. One thing I think the show does well, conceptually, is that it doesn't let prison be just backstory. Prison becomes a reference point. It becomes a before and after line that everything is measured against. Shu Qiong doesn't just remember prison, he embodies it. And the outside world keeps reactivating it. A humiliating conversation can feel like a cell. An unfair accusation can feel like a sentencing. A threat can feel like a guard's shadow. If the direction and acting communicate that, you don't need literal flashbacks to feel the imprint. And I have to mention the possibility of silence as a motif again, because silence is the language of trauma and strategy. A character who talks less is often a character who has learned that words can be used against you. In business settings, words are contracts, traps, headlines, leverage. In prison settings, words can be violence. So Shu Qiong becoming quieter over time can be read as growth, or as damage, or as both. The best performance lets you feel both. He's quieter because he's smarter, and he's quieter because he's hurt. If you're a fan of big emotional scenes, don't worry, the premise supports them. Love plus guilt plus power equals inevitable explosions. But what I appreciated is when the drama doesn't make those explosions neat. Real arguments don't land on perfect lines. Real resentment leaks out sideways. Someone brings up something from years ago that they swore they forgave. Someone says, "I'm fine," in a tone that is basically a knife. If the show writes those moments with specificity rather than generic melodrama, it becomes painfully relatable. And here's a wry little aside, because otherwise I'll drown in seriousness. There's a special kind of drama dialogue where someone says, "This is just business," and I instantly want another character to respond, "No, it's not, you're just a coward." Like, that line is such a red flag in fiction and in life. It's the verbal equivalent of putting gloves on before you touch someone's throat. Now, I want to return to Fang Tian's role after prison, because the mentorship doesn't necessarily end when the cell door opens. Even if Fang Tian isn't physically present later, again, I'm not inventing specifics, the lessons are present. Shu Qiong becomes a living continuation of Fang Tian's worldview. That creates an interesting moral question. If you become effective by adopting the survival philosophy of someone hardened by prison, are you still yourself? Or are you a copy? And if you are a copy, is that tragic, or is that just how humans survive, by inheriting each other's armor? That question matters because it connects to the show's ending direction. Choosing love and simplicity is, in a way, Shu Qiong choosing not to become Fang Tian's future. It's him deciding that strategy is a tool, not a religion. And I love that idea, because it's basically saying, I can learn from darkness without living in it. Another rehook, and this one is for the people who love power plays. The most brutal move in this story isn't a threat or a takeover. It's the moment Shu Qiong realizes someone is trying to buy his loyalty, and he has to decide whether loyalty is for sale when the price is safety. Because loyalty is the currency everyone wants from him. His girlfriend wants it emotionally. Business rivals want it strategically. Old enemies want to break it. Fang Tian has shaped it. Xu Qiong's loyalty is the center of the chessboard. And the drama is, essentially, watching everyone tug on it to see if it tears. Let's also talk about how simple life is framed in a drama about wealth, because sometimes writers accidentally make poverty look like virtue and wealth look like sin, which is lazy. The better framing is that wealth is not inherently evil, but the pursuit of it within corrupt systems forces compromises. The drama seems more aligned with that. It's not that money is cursed, it's that the storm around money is relentless. You don't get to be rich in a power struggle without becoming a target or a predator. If Xu Qiong is the type of person whose core drive is love and dignity, then that world will constantly grind against him. And that grinding is where the show's title becomes more than poetic. The storm rises because power struggles are self-feeding. One move provokes another. One humiliation demands a response. One victory creates a new enemy. The storm doesn't rise because the plot needs action, it rises because everyone involved has pride. Pride is the weather system. When you think of it like that, the ending choice, love and simplicity, becomes a weather change. Not a plot twist. A climate shift. It's the protagonist deciding to stop adding heat to the system. But again, all of that depends on whether the drama convincingly depicts why the storm is so hard to walk away from. Because walking away isn't just leaving money. It's leaving the thrill of control. It's leaving the identity of being someone people fear. It's leaving the narrative where your suffering is justified because it leads to dominance. Walking away means you might have to face the raw fact that you suffered and there is no cosmic reward. That's terrifying. And that's why, if the drama earns it, that choice is brave. I want to paint another vivid mini-scene, not to spoil, but to capture the feeling the show aims for in its best stretches. Imagine Xu Qiong in a sleek, quiet space after release. It could be an office corridor, a lobby, some place with polished surfaces. The lighting is warm but artificial, like it's trying too hard to be comforting. There's a faint hum of air conditioning, the kind that makes silence feel engineered. Someone says his name with a smile that's 1 degree too practiced. A handshake is offered. Xu Qiong reaches out, and the camera lingers on hands meeting, skin on skin, but emotionally it feels like gloves. The other person's grip is firm, almost a demonstration. Xu Qiong's face barely changes, but his eyes do that tiny recalculation. His reading. His measuring. His hearing the hidden part of the sentence. And then, just for a flicker, you see something old in him, an impulse to trust, to be normal, and it gets suppressed like a reflex. The handshake ends. The smile remains. The storm moves one step closer. That, to me, is the show in microcosm. Not the plot mechanics, but the feeling of a man trying to function in a world where every interaction has an angle. Now, let's be fair, not every viewer wants that psychological density. Some people want clean heroes and clean villains. They want revenge that feels righteous. They want business intrigue that's easy to follow. If you're in that mood, this drama's insistence on moral ambiguity might feel like it's denying you pleasure. But if you like character-driven tension, if you like watching a protagonist resist becoming his worst self, then this is the kind of story that can hook you even when the external plot is familiar. I also think the drama invites a conversation about what strength actually is. Xu Qiong begins with a kind of strength that is impulsive and loving. Prison forces a different strength, endurance. Fang Tian adds another strength, strategy. Business power struggles demand another, self-control under social pressure. Romance demands another, vulnerability. The show is basically stacking different definitions of strength and asking which one lasts. And that's interesting because most dramas pick one definition and reward it. This one seems to be testing them against each other. If I'm nitpicking, I'd say the risk is that the series might overstuff its thematic plate. When you have revenge, business intrigue, mentorship, romance, and a moral ending, you need very disciplined writing to keep the story cohesive. The audience can only hold so many threads emotionally. If the drama keeps introducing new conflicts without resolving the emotional consequences of old ones, it can feel like a treadmill. And treadmills are the enemy of catharsis. But the upside of that complexity is that it gives actors room to play. Xu Qiong can be tender in one scene and calculating in the next, and both can feel truthful. Fang Qian can be protective in one moment and chilling in another, and you're left unsettled in a good way. The girlfriend character, if written with depth, can be loving and resentful at the same time, which is exactly what real people are when they've been hurt by circumstances. Another rehook. Because I don't want you to miss what I think is the show's most quietly radical idea, it suggests that the opposite of power isn't weakness. It's contentment. And contentment is the one thing the storm can't monetize. That's such a grown-up idea. Because weakness can be exploited, sure, but contentment can't. If you don't crave their approval, their money, their status, their fear, they lose leverage. That's why so many power systems try to keep people dissatisfied. Dissatisfaction is profitable. So if Xu Qiong ends up choosing a simple life, it's not just romance, it's rebellion. It's refusing to be profitable. And you can see how prison ironically taught him that. When your life is stripped down to basics, you learn what you actually need. You learn what you can live without. That can be empowering. Then you go back into the world and everyone tries to sell you needs again: status, revenge, wealth, dominance. Xu Qiong has to decide which needs are real and which are addictions disguised as goals. Let's talk about the intrigue part again from a writing perspective. Intrigue works when information is treated like a character. When who knows what, and who believes what, and who is lying about what they know, those become the moving parts. If the drama handles that well, you get tension without action scenes. You get tension from a glance, from a delayed response, from a sudden change in tone. If it handles it clumsily, it becomes confusing or convenient. And nothing kills intrigue faster than convenience. The fact that Xu Qiong learns strategy makes the intrigue more plausible, because he can plausibly anticipate traps. But it also raises the bar. Once your protagonist is strategic, the audience expects the plot to be strategic too. We don't want to see him walk into obvious nonsense just to create drama. We want his mistakes to be human mistakes, emotion, loyalty, guilt, not stupid mistakes. That's the difference between a compelling downfall and a frustrating one. And that's why the romance is not a side plot here, it's the main source of believable vulnerability. Love makes you irrational. Love makes you hesitate. Love makes you forgive when you shouldn't, or fight when you should walk away. If Xu Qiong's biggest weak point is love, that's both poetic and realistic. It also keeps him from becoming a cold machine. So whenever the show returns to the relationship dynamic, it's not just giving you a break from boardrooms, it's reminding you what's at stake. I'm going to say something that might annoy some viewers: I don't think the drama needs to make every antagonist evil. In fact, the best version of this story would make some of Xu Qiong's enemies understandable. Not justified, understandable. Because power struggles are rarely about cartoon villainy. They're about insecurity, greed, fear, pride, survival. If the show gives you antagonists who truly believe they are doing what they must, then Xu Qiong's moral choices become sharper. Because it's easy to be good against a monster. It's harder to be good against a human being who is also trying to survive. And on the flip side, the show shouldn't make Xu Qiong too pure. He should be allowed to be angry. He should be allowed to fantasize about revenge. He should be allowed to do things that make us uncomfortable. Otherwise, the final choice of love and simplicity feels unearned, like a saintly decision rather than a hard-won one. There's a moment that stories like this often include, not necessarily this one in a literal scene, but thematically, and it's the moment when the protagonist realizes he can hurt someone the way he was hurt. That's the moment of truth. Because the world is offering him a chance to become the storm. And the drama's success depends on how it portrays that temptation, not as cool, but as intoxicating. Not as justice, but as relief. Revenge often feels like relief before it feels like regret. The show's titles, Hidden Sword, becomes, in that sense, the protagonist's capacity for cruelty. It's hidden because he doesn't want to admit it's there. He wants to believe he's still the man who went to prison for love. But prison and power change people. They introduce new possibilities. And one of those possibilities is, you can become the kind of person you used to fear. That's what makes the story psychologically sticky. I also want to give a nod to how the drama could be using color and wardrobe, again, speaking generally, because we're not pinning specifics. A lot of character evolution in these stories is shown through a gradual shift from softer, more natural palettes into sharper, colder, more controlled looks. Or the reverse, someone who starts in harsh lines and ends in softer textures. It's visual subtext. And when a show is attentive, you feel it. You feel the character's armor thickening, or loosening, without anyone saying a word. Same with music motifs. A mentor theme that's not quite comforting. A romance theme that starts warm and becomes strained. A power motif that sounds seductive but has a dissonant note under it. The best soundtracks in these dramas don't tell you what to feel, they tell you what the character is trying not to feel. That's where the manipulation becomes art. Another rehook, because we're approaching the part where the drama's moral spine becomes visible. The series doesn't just ask whether Shu Qiong can win. It asks whether he can stop needing to win. And that is a completely different battle. That, needing to win, is, in my opinion, the real addiction in power stories. Not money. Not status. The addiction is the feeling that you can rewrite humiliation by dominating the person who humiliated you. The addiction is that you can fix the past by controlling the present. But the past doesn't get fixed. The past just gets buried under trophies. And the show's ending direction suggests it knows that. It suggests it wants to show a character stepping out of that addiction, not just out of a plot. This is where I'll bring in another slightly contrarian angle. Some viewers will read the ending choice, Love and Simple Life, as anticlimactic, like the drama is refusing to commit to its own power fantasy. I actually think that refusal, if handled with emotional honesty, is the point. The power fantasy is the bait. The human story is the hook. The drama is using genre expectations to lure you into a more uncomfortable question: why do we crave dominance endings in the first place? What does that say about us? About what we think justice looks like? And look, I'm not judging anyone for wanting catharsis. Catharsis is real. It's why we watch dramas. But there's a difference between catharsis and cruelty. Sometimes the line is thin, and a show that challenges that can feel like it's scolding you. The trick is, it shouldn't scold. It should invite reflection. When Pedang Tersembunyi Badai yang Bangkit is at its best, it invites rather than scolds. When it's weaker, it might risk feeling like it's tugging you toward a moral lesson. But even that tug is interesting, because it's consistent with Fang Tian's influence. Fang Tian is essentially giving Shu Qiong a manual for navigating a cruel world. The drama then asks, do you use that manual to become cruel, or do you use it to avoid cruelty? That's the moral fork. And it's a fork a lot of us face in smaller ways: how we respond to being hurt, whether we pass the hurt on, whether we turn survival skills into weapons. I keep coming back to the girlfriend dynamic because it's the anchor. If the romance is shallow, the ending collapses. If the romance is complex, the ending has weight. And complexity means letting both characters be imperfect. It means letting Shu Qiong sometimes weaponize his sacrifice emotionally, even if he doesn't mean to. It means letting the girlfriend sometimes resent being the reason his life derailed, even if she loves him. Those are ugly feelings, but they are real, and dramas that pretend love is only noble miss the point of love. Love is messy. Love is sometimes selfish. Love is sometimes a burden. Love is also, somehow, still worth it. And if the drama really commits to that, then the simple life ending isn't just, we're in love. It's, we choose each other without using each other. It's, we stop treating love like a debt ledger. It's, we stop making the relationship carry the weight of a prison sentence. That's powerful, if the show earns it. Let me also touch on the idea of identity, because the protagonist's name, Shu Qiong, becomes a symbol in his world, whether he wants it to or not. People will project stories onto him: the loyal boyfriend, the ex-con, the strategic survivor, the threat, the pawn, the comeback king. And one of the most exhausting things about trauma is being turned into a narrative other people consume. The drama's intrigue world would absolutely do that. Business and power love narratives. They love reputations. They love turning humans into headlines. And Xu Qiong's internal battle includes resisting being reduced to a symbol. Another rehook, because this is where the show can either elevate itself or flatten out. Pay attention to whether Xu Qiong's choices feel like he's reclaiming authorship of his life, or whether they feel like he's just reacting to whoever is loudest in the room. Reactivity is a prison. You can be outside and still live reactively. You can base your entire life on, "I'll show them." That's still a cage, just with a nicer view. The drama's ending direction implies that Xu Qiong eventually breaks that cage. But the journey to that break is what makes the story meaningful. If he breaks it too cleanly, it's fantasy. If he breaks it after slipping, compromising, almost becoming what he hates, then it feels real. And one thing that helps that realism is allowing consequences to be slow. In melodrama, consequences are immediate and obvious. In adult drama, consequences can be delayed. You make a compromise today, and it poisons your relationship 6 months later. You betray a value quietly, and you don't feel the shame until you're alone at night. You win a power struggle, and then you realize you can't stop scanning for new enemies. That delayed consequence is where psychological storytelling lives. I'll also say, the show's core theme feels timely for 2026. We're in an era where everyone is exhausted by hustle culture, by constant proving, by public performance. A drama that ends with "choose love and a simple life over wealth" is tapping into a cultural fatigue. But the danger is it can become a cliché if it's not grounded in character-specific pain. It has to feel like Xu Qiong's choice, not the writer's message. The best dramas make the message emerge from the character's life rather than being placed on top of it like a sticker. And this drama's premise gives it the tools to do that. Prison is a life-altering consequence. Strategy training is morally ambiguous. Business intrigue is ethically corrosive. Romance is emotionally complicated. Those ingredients can cook into something that feels earned. I'm still not at the point where I want to drop a verdict, because there's more to chew on, especially the way the show uses power as a test of intimacy. Power struggles don't just threaten safety, they threaten trust. When you live in a world where everyone has an angle, you start assuming your partner has one too, even if they don't. That suspicion can kill love faster than any external enemy. So the romance arc, if handled well, will include a slow rebuilding of trust that is not naive. Trust that includes boundaries. Trust that includes honesty about fear. And I want to be clear, simple life doesn't mean simple emotions. If anything, choosing a quiet life after chaos can be emotionally harder. Because you don't have adrenaline to distract you. You don't have enemies to blame. You have to face yourself. You have to sit with what you did. You have to sit with what was done to you. Peace is not just a reward, it's an environment where your wounds become audible. That's a concept most action-heavy dramas avoid. They end on victory because it's clean. This drama, by premise, seems willing to end on something quieter and more complicated. And that makes it interesting. Another rehook, and this one is for anyone who's ever felt stuck in their own anger. The drama's most suspenseful question isn't, who will betray him? It's, when the storm finally calms down, will Xu Qiong know who he is without it? Because storms become identities. Some people don't know how to live without conflict. They become addicted to crisis. They become addicted to being the survivor. If Xu Qiong has spent years orienting himself around survival, first in prison, then in power struggles, then simple life is not just an option. It's a whole new self. And building a new self is hard. It requires letting go of the version of you that was forged in pain. That version might be the strongest version you've ever been. It might also be the loneliest. I think that's why the title's Hidden Sword resonates. You don't just hide a sword from enemies. Sometimes you hide it from yourself. Sometimes you hide your capacity for violence because you're scared of what it means that you have it. And the drama's arc is essentially Xu Qiong learning to live with that knowledge without being ruled by it. And that, honestly, is a more mature arc than many revenge dramas attempt. I'm going to keep going into the craft side for a bit, because if you're a critics-type viewer, This is where you'll either appreciate the show or roll your eyes at me being too generous. The script's challenge is balancing exposition with tension. Strategy stories require clarity, we need to understand enough to feel the stakes. But too much clarity becomes spoon-feeding. The best writing lets you infer. It lets you connect dots. It respects your intelligence. If Pedang Tersembunyi Badai yang Bangkit respects the viewer, it will show you motives through behavior, not through speeches. A strong director also uses blocking to show power. Who sits first? Who stands while the other sits? Who controls the doorway? Who walks away first? Who invades personal space? In prison, blocking is about physical dominance and surveillance. In business, blocking is about social dominance and ownership of space. Xu Qiong moving between those worlds should change how he occupies space. Early on, he might shrink, even if he's brave. Later, he might stand still and let others orbit him. That's acting and directing working together. And the editing can reinforce strategy by cutting on intention rather than action. You cut to a reaction half a beat early so the viewer senses someone is calculating. You hold on a face a beat too long so a smile becomes suspicious. Those micro-choices create paranoia in the audience in a good way. They put you inside the strategic mindset. Of course, if overused, it can feel melodramatic, like every sip of tea is a conspiracy. But the premise suggests a world where paranoia might be rational, so a certain amount of that heightened tension is earned. Now, I'm going to stop at a natural point soon, but not before I underline what I think is the emotional centerpiece of the whole drama. Xu Qiong's sacrifice for love is not treated as a single heroic act. It becomes a chain reaction. It changes who he becomes. It changes what love means to him. It changes what his girlfriend owes him, or refuses to owe him. It changes how the world sees him. It becomes a currency others try to spend on his behalf. And the tragedy is that the act was pure, but the world it lands in is not. And that is exactly why the final choice, love and a simple life, has the potential to be not just romantic, but radical, because it's Xu Qiong reclaiming the original purity of his motive without repeating the original mistake of being blind to the world's cruelty. It's love with eyes open. It's love with strategy, not strategy against love. And the next layer I want to dig into, because it's where the show's tension gets almost unbearably intimate, is the way strategy can corrode tenderness in tiny, invisible ways, like how even a loving question can start sounding like an interrogation when you've trained yourself to search for angles, and how Xu Qiong's attempts to protect the relationship can accidentally become controlling if he's not careful, and how the drama plays with that line between protection and possession, between loyalty and obligation, between sacrifice and control, and that's a line this kind of story has to treat like live wire. Because once someone has learned strategy as a survival skill, they start applying it everywhere, even in places that are supposed to be safe. A loving, "Where are you going?" can start sounding like surveillance. A protective, "Let me handle it," can start sounding like dismissal. A sacrifice can quietly become a claim. And the most painful part is that the person doing it might genuinely believe they are loving you better, because they are loving you more efficiently, more safely, more intelligently. Strategy turns affection into risk management, and risk management is not the same thing as intimacy. What kept me invested is that the drama's premise basically forces Xu Qiong into that emotional contradiction. He's the guy who went to prison for love, meaning his love is proven through action. But prison teaches you that action has consequences, and Fang Tian teaches you that consequences can be predicted, controlled, avoided. So now love becomes something he wants to protect, and the way he knows how to protect things is by controlling variables. And a relationship is not a variable. A human being is not a variable. If the show understands that difference, it can get devastating in the best way. And here's what makes that dynamic so compelling in a power and intrigue narrative: the outside world is constantly validating control. Business rewards control. Power rewards control. Even revenge, weirdly, is a kind of control. I can make the world balance again. So Xu Qiong is being trained by his environment to tighten his grip, while his heart is begging him to loosen it. That's not just character conflict, that's theme embodied. If you've ever watched someone you care about become hypervigilant, someone who's always scanning, always anticipating, always bracing, you know how love can become exhausting in that environment. You start feeling like you're in a relationship with their fear, not just with them. And you can't argue someone out of fear. You can't logic them into calm. You can only build safety slowly, and safety in this story is scarce by design. Now, one thing I really want to emphasize is that Xu Qiong's strategic evolution shouldn't be framed as, "he's broken now." That's too simple and honestly kind of insulting to people who've survived hard things. Survival skills are not moral flaws. The drama is at its smartest when it treats strategy as adaptive, and then asks what happens when an adaptive skill gets overused. It's like adrenaline. Adrenaline saves your life in a crisis. Adrenaline wrecks your life if you live in it for years. And that's why the storm imagery keeps feeling apartment storms aren't evil. They are just pressure and movement. The issue is when you live under them so long you forget what still air feels like. Stick with me here, because I think this is the hinge that decides whether you'll love or hate the final direction. The show isn't trying to make you admire Xu Qiong's power. It's trying to make you miss his peace. That's a subtle but massive difference. A lot of dramas want you to clap when the protagonist becomes formidable. This one, from what we're given, is more interested in the cost of being formidable. It wants you to feel that yes, Xu Qiong is sharper now, but he's also more alone inside his own head. He can read rooms, but he can't rest in them. He can anticipate betrayal, but he can't accept affection without checking for hidden clauses. That's not a cool hero fantasy. That's an expensive adulthood. And I'll admit something that I don't always like admitting as a viewer: I caught myself rooting for the wrong things at times. I wanted the drama to give me the payback dopamine. I wanted the big humiliations for the people who wronged him. I wanted the kind of victory that feels like the universe finally apologizing. And the show's whole point, I think, is that the universe doesn't apologize. People don't apologize unless it benefits them. Systems don't apologize at all. So if you build your future around waiting for that apology, you're basically chaining yourself to the past. That's where Fang Tian's role becomes quietly tragic. Fang Tian's worldview, again, based only on the premise, staying general, is built for survival, not for happiness. And survival and happiness overlap sometimes, but not always. Fang Tian is teaching Xu Qiong how to stay alive in the storm. He's not teaching him how to live after it. Mentors can give you weapons. They can't always teach you how to put them down. And you can feel that in the kind of lessons that strategy mentors give. They teach you to doubt. They teach you to predict. They teach you to see the worst possible version of people's intentions. That can save you. It can also poison you. And the show's premise sets up the central question: how do you use a cynical tool without becoming cynical? There's also something really interesting about the idea that Xu Qiong learns strategy inside prison, because it complicates the usual narrative of prison as purely dehumanizing. It is dehumanizing, but it can also be clarifying. When you lose freedom, you gain a certain brutal honesty about what matters. And what matters often becomes smaller: loyalty, respect, food, sleep, safety, dignity. Then you return to the outside world and suddenly the matters become huge again: wealth, status, influence, image. The drama's ending direction suggests Xu Qiong eventually returns to the smaller matters, but this time by choice rather than by force. If you're wondering why I'm being so philosophical about a drama that includes business intrigue and revenge, it's because those genres, at their best, are just vehicles. They are not the destination. The destination is always the same: identity. What kind of person do you become when you have reason and opportunity to become worse? Now let's get into the business intrigue element in a more practical way, because I know some of you are here for craft critique, not existential therapy. Business intrigue is hard to make cinematic. It's meetings, documents, negotiations, reputations. So directors lean on visual metaphors, glass walls, reflections, long corridors, high angles that make people look small, low angles that make people look predatory. They also lean on rhythm, fast cuts to create urgency, or long takes to create dread. What I want from a drama like this is intentional rhythm shifts. When Xu Qiong is in control, the camera should feel steadier. When he's being manipulated, the framing should feel off-center, like the world is slightly tilted. When he's tempted, the lighting can get warmer, more seductive. When he's cornered, it can get colder, flatter, more clinical. Those are the kinds of choices that make intrigue feel like a physical sensation rather than a plot description. And when the show doesn't do that, when it just stages the conversation in a standard shot reverse shot with dramatic music, you feel the missed potential. Because this story has such a strong internal arc that the external arc has to match it in specificity. Generic visuals will not hold a non-generic moral journey. Let me throw you a question that kept circling in my mind while watching. If Xu Qiong becomes a master of strategy, does that mean he becomes free, or does it mean he becomes more tightly bound to the very world that made him need strategy in the first place? Because strategy is reactive. It exists because threats exist. If you're always strategizing, you're always living as if the threat is present. That's survival, yes. That's also captivity. A simple life, in that framing, isn't about being humble. It's about no longer needing strategy to breathe. One of my favorite kinds of tension in dramas is when a protagonist can win, but winning would cost them the thing they originally wanted. It's not, can he do it? It's, should he? And that's exactly the kind of tension this premise promises. Xu Qiong can lean into power. He can use Fang Qian's teachings. He can navigate the storm. But if he does it fully, what happens to the love that started all of this? Does love become collateral? Does it become a bargaining chip in his own mind? Does he start treating the relationship as something he can secure through dominance rather than nurture through vulnerability? That's where the acting choices really matter, because the actor playing Xu Qiong has to sell the split, the competent face he shows the world, and the softer, more wounded face he tries to show at home, if he still knows how. The show's biggest emotional punches won't come from a big villain monologue. They'll come from a quiet moment where his girlfriend looks at him and realizes she's standing next to a stranger. Or where Xu Qiong realizes he's become someone she has to manage, not someone she can rest with. Those are the moments that make simple life feel like salvation rather than surrender. And if the drama doesn't land those moments, the ending can feel like a moral lecture. That's the tightrope. Earn the quietness, or the quietness feels cheap. Here's a rehook that I think is important, because it reframes the whole viewing experience. The drama's most suspenseful twist isn't an external betrayal. It's the moment you notice Xu Qiong starting to lie, maybe not with words, but with emotional omission, to the person he loves. Emotional omission is the first stage of losing intimacy. You stop sharing because sharing feels dangerous. You tell yourself you're protecting them. You tell yourself you're handling it. And then suddenly you're living parallel lives under the same roof. That's heartbreak. That's also incredibly realistic for people who've been through trauma or high-stakes environments. And it's exactly the kind of heartbreak a story like this should be brave enough to show. Now, the premise says Xu Qiong faces, Dendam, intrigue business, Dan Perabutan Keikuasan. Revenge, business intrigue, power struggles. That's a lot of external conflict. The temptation in writing is to keep escalating external conflict because it's easy to measure. Bigger stakes, bigger enemies, bigger consequences. But the harder and more meaningful escalation is internal, the way each external conflict tightens his inner knot. So what does good internal escalation look like? It looks like the same situation producing a different response over time. Early on, Xu Qiong might respond to a threat with anger. Midway, he responds with calculation. Late game, he responds with tiredness, because he realizes the threat will never end if he keeps feeding it. That evolution is what makes the final choice plausible. Not a sudden "I changed," but a gradual "I'm exhausted." Exhaustion is underrated as a narrative engine. We talk about ambition, revenge, love, greed. But exhaustion is what makes people drop swords. Exhaustion is what makes them stop proving. Exhaustion is what makes them choose simplicity not as virtue, but as necessity. And this is where I want to be respectfully contrarian again. a lot of viewers treat choosing simple life endings as automatically noble. I don't think it's automatically noble. It can be selfish. It can be avoidance. It can be privilege masquerading as wisdom. The only thing that makes it noble is whether it's connected to responsibility. Is Xu Qiong walking away because he's refusing to become a monster, and because he wants to protect love? Or is he walking away because he's tired and doesn't want to deal with consequences he helped create? The difference is huge. And the drama, to earn its ending, has to make us feel that difference without preaching. Because simple life, in itself, isn't a moral halo. It's just a life. What matters is what he had to give up, and what he refuses to do to get it. I'm also interested in how Fang Tian fits into that. Fang Tian's teachings are what allow Xu Qiong to compete in the power arena. But if Xu Qiong chooses simplicity, does that mean Fang Tian's teachings were wasted? I'd argue no. In fact, the deepest version of this story is that Xu Qiong needed strategy to survive the storm long enough to be able to choose peace freely. Without strategy, he's a victim. With strategy, he has agency. And agency is what makes walking away meaningful. You can't call it a choice if you never had the option. That's such an important narrative distinction. He chose love is only satisfying if we believe he could have chosen power. And I can already hear someone saying, okay, but is it entertaining? Yes, when it doesn't forget to be. And that's where the pacing comes back. This drama needs to maintain a sense of forward motion, even while it's doing all this internal character work. The best way to do that is with questions, not just events. Every scene should pose a question. Will he trust? Will he doubt? Will he retaliate? Will he reveal? Will he hide? Will he compromise? Will he refuse? When the show goes too long without sharpening those questions, you feel drift. Drift is the enemy in intrigue dramas. Drift makes meetings feel like meetings. Now, I want to talk about something that's easy to overlook: how prison shapes your relationship to time. Inside, time is heavy. It stacks. Each day feels like a stone. Outside, time can feel frantic, like it's trying to catch up. That time distortion is fertile ground for storytelling, because it makes the protagonist feel out of sync with everyone else. Xu Qiong is returning to a world that's moved on, and he's carrying an inner clock that still ticks like prison. If the drama shows that through editing, lingering shots, abrupt cuts, disorienting transitions, it can create a visceral empathy. You don't just understand he's changed. You feel it in the rhythm of the show. And this is where sound design can be genius, too. Prison has a specific soundscape: metal, echo, footsteps, keys, doors, muffled voices. If the show echoes those sounds in the outside world, an elevator ding that sounds like a cell door, a lock clicking, a hallway echo, it can trigger you emotionally without needing exposition. It's subtle psychological horror, almost. And I mean that as a compliment. Trauma is a horror genre in your nervous system. Here's another rehook that I think will keep you listening. The drama's real, hidden sword might not be Xu Qiong's ability to outsmart people. It might be his ability to forgive without forgetting. And that is rarer than revenge. Forgiveness is not letting someone off the hook. Forgiveness can be choosing not to let the hook stay in your skin. That's why it's powerful. But it's also why it's controversial as an ending direction. Some viewers interpret forgiveness as weakness. In reality, forgiveness can be one of the hardest forms of strength, because it requires giving up the sweet intoxication of righteous anger. And righteous anger is so seductive in stories like this because Xu Qiong genuinely was wronged, at least by circumstance, by system, by whoever pushed the situation into prison. The audience wants him to burn the world down because we want the world to acknowledge him. But the story's ending implies he's going to stop demanding acknowledgement from a world that doesn't care. That's a mature heartbreak. Now, I'm going to slow down and paint you another sensory moment, not because I'm inventing a specific scene, but because this is the kind of moment the drama needs to have to emotionally justify its final philosophy. The strongest endings are the ones where the character has already been living the choice for a while before they name it. Now, let's talk about the intrigue and power struggle in the middle to late stretch in terms of what tends to trip dramas up. Intrigue becomes noise if every character is equally suspicious and equally cunning. Then nobody stands out and the audience stops caring. You need contrast. You need someone sincere, someone reckless, someone patient, someone desperate. And you need Xu Qiong's strategic mindset to be challenged, not just validated. Strategy stories get boring when the protagonist is always correct. They get exciting when the protagonist's strategy fails because the world is more chaotic than any plan. That's why Fang Tian's mentorship is so interesting. Fang Tian gives Xu Qiong a model of human behavior. But models are not reality. People surprise you. Love surprises you. Your own heart surprises you. The best narrative tension comes when Xu Qiong's strategic model clashes with his emotional reality. When he predicts someone will betray him and they don't. When he predicts someone will love him and they can't. When he predicts he can walk away cleanly and he discovers the storm is inside him too. And this brings me to something the drama can do that I always appreciate: allow the protagonist to be wrong in ways that aren't idiotic. Wrong because he's human. Wrong because he's wounded. Wrong because he's loyal. Wrong because he's tired. A lot of viewers equate strategic protagonist with never wrong. But a truly strategic protagonist can still make emotionally motivated mistakes. In fact, that's what makes them compelling. Intelligence doesn't make you immune to longing. It just makes your longing more articulate. Here's a small, self-aware aside: every time a drama character learns strategy, I start thinking I should learn strategy too, and then I remember my greatest strategic feat this week was timing my coffee so it didn't make me anxious during a meeting. So, you know, we all have our own battlefields. Back to the drama. The title's Hidden Sword also suggests something about concealed identity. Xu Qiong goes into prison as one man and comes out as another, but he can't fully show that new man right away. The outside world has expectations. People want to see the old Xu Qiong so they can keep their narrative intact. If he shows up too changed, they feel threatened. If he shows up unchanged, they feel comfortable enough to hurt him again. So he has to calibrate what he reveals. That calibration is strategy. It's also loneliness. You're alone when you can't be fully seen. And I think loneliness is one of the most present but unspoken themes in this premise. Prison is lonely even when you're surrounded by people. Power is lonely because nobody's affection feels pure. Revenge is lonely because it isolates you from tenderness. Even love can become lonely if guilt and debt creep into it. So when the ending direction says, simple life, I hear, a life where he can be seen without armor. That's why I'm not mad at the ending direction in concept. I'm wary of it in execution, but in concept, it makes sense. It's the only ending that doesn't perpetuate the storm. Any ending where he wins powerfully would likely be a trap ending, where he becomes the thing he fought. Now, let's talk about fairness. Some viewers will argue that choosing simplicity is unrealistic in a world of power struggles. That the world won't let you walk away. That enemies follow you. That trauma follows you. And that's true to a point. But drama is not documentary. Drama is emotional truth expressed through heightened choices. The emotional truth here is that stepping away is a form of agency, even if the world still has consequences. It's the character refusing to let the storm define him. The show doesn't need to pretend the simple life is perfectly safe. It just needs to show it's more honest. More aligned with what he values. I want to dig into the theme of value for a moment. Xu Qiong begins with a clear value: love. Prison and strategy complicate that value by adding survival and dignity. Business power struggles tempt him with status and wealth. Revenge tempts him with dominance and closure. The ending choice suggests he returns to love and simplicity. The arc, then, is not, he learns to be good. He learns which values are actually his, and which ones were imposed by pain. That's a strong arc. And it's the kind of arc that can feel deeply satisfying if the show respects the audience enough to show the mess. Here's another rehook, because we're approaching the philosophical core. The drama isn't asking, is wealth bad? It's asking, what are you willing to become to keep it? And once you frame it that way, the ending is no longer about money. It's about identity. Now, there's a trap with identity arcs too. Sometimes writers make the protagonist choose love by making the love interest the voice of morality, constantly lecturing them. That's not compelling, and it's unfair to the love interest. It turns them into a conscience rather than a person. The better way is to make love itself the ground where consequences are felt. Not lectures, but losses. Not speeches, but distance. Not moralizing, but heartbreak. And heartbreak in this context doesn't have to be a breakup. It can be emotional separation. It can be the feeling of talking to someone you love and realizing they are not fully present, because half their mind is tracking threats. That's why the drama's best scenes, in my imagination based on this premise, are not the big confrontations. They are the quiet aftermaths. The scenes where Xu Qiong returns from a power struggle encounter and tries to pretend he's fine. The scenes where his girlfriend asks a normal question and he answers like he's being interrogated. The scenes where love keeps knocking and strategy keeps locking the door. Now let's talk about the moral framing of Fang Tian. Fang Tian is a mentor, but mentors in prison stories often represent an alternative morality, a code. Fang Tian's code is likely not, be good. It's, be smart. The question is whether, be smart, can coexist with, be kind. The world often treats them as opposites. But they aren't. You can be smart and kind. It just means your kindness is chosen, not naive. It means you know what people are capable of and you still choose decency. Picture a late-game moment where Xu Qiong is alone after a high-stakes confrontation. Not triumphant. Not devastated. Just quiet. The room is too clean. The kind of clean that feels like it doesn't want you to exist in it. There's a soft city noise outside, distant cars, the thin buzz of nightlife that sounds like everyone else's life continuing. Xu Qiong sits down, and the silence isn't peaceful. It's ringing. His phone is there. Money is there, metaphorically or literally. Options are there. Power is there. And yet his body looks like it's carrying something heavy. Then, maybe, he thinks about the reason he went to prison in the first place. Not as a dramatic flashback, but as a weight in his chest. And it's in that kind of scene that a great actor can change everything with one small decision, one exhale that's almost a sob, one blink that holds too long, one tiny flinch like he's realizing that the life he's building is not the life he wanted. That's the seed of the final choice. That's where simple life becomes emotionally inevitable rather than narratively convenient. I want to be clear, I'm not saying this drama is flawless at delivering those moments. I'm saying the premise has the bones for it, and when it hits, it can hit hard. And I'm also going to admit something else personal, because I think it matters. I have a complicated relationship with revenge narratives. Part of me loves them. I love the neatness. I love the scorekeeping. I love the fantasy that the world can be balanced through force of will. But another part of me knows that revenge is a trap because it makes your pain the center of your identity. You become loyal to your wound. And when a drama challenges that, I get uncomfortable in a way that feels necessary. Pedang Tersembunyi Badai yang Bangkit seems built to create that discomfort. It sets you up to cheer for dominance, then asks you to consider the emotional price. That's why I say it felt like an argument with myself. It's not just entertainment, it's interrogation, but not in an obnoxious, preachy way, more in a, you sure that's what you want, way. Now, let's talk about the romance again, because it's the emotional landing pad for the ending. The drama's premise says Xu Qiong ultimately chooses love and a simple life rather than wealth. That tells you the romance is not just a subplot. It's the moral compass. But romance as moral compass is dangerous, because it can reduce the girlfriend to a symbol of goodness and simplicity. That's not fair to her character, and it's not interesting to watch. The better way to do it is to make the relationship a mirror, not a pedestal. Love isn't goodness. Love is a mirror that shows you who you are becoming. If Xu Qiong looks into the relationship and sees himself becoming someone he doesn't like, the relationship becomes the site of revelation. And if the girlfriend is written with agency, she's not just waiting for him, she's also making choices about what she will accept, what she will not accept, and what kind of life she wants. That way, Simple Life is not Xu Qiong saving her. It's them choosing each other's humanity. That's the version of this ending I want. Not, he rescues romance from the storm, but romance rescues him from himself. And again, that's only satisfying if it's not simplistic. Love doesn't fix trauma. Love can motivate healing, but healing is work. One of the more subtle themes implied by the premise is that power can be used to punish, and that's what makes it seductive to someone who was punished by the powerless. Xu Qiong's prison time is a consequence of being on the losing end of a system. So when he later enters business, power struggles, he's entering the realm of the people who usually don't get punished. That's intoxicating. It's the fantasy of finally being on the side that gives consequences, not receives them. The drama's moral challenge is whether he uses that realm to restore dignity without becoming a new version of the Punisher. It's basically asking, will he become the system that hurt him, just with a better motive? And if you're paying attention, you realize that's one of the central tragedies of real life too. People hurt by systems sometimes reproduce those systems when they gain a little power, because it's the only model of power they've ever seen. Here's a rehook that's a little sharper. The storm isn't just enemies. The storm is the part of Xu Qiong that starts enjoying being feared. That's the scariest part. Not that he'll be hurt again. That he'll like what he becomes to avoid being hurt. And I want to sit with that, because it's where acting and writing have to collaborate. The show shouldn't make fear-based power look purely cool. It should make it look appealing and disgusting at the same time. Like sugar that rots your teeth. The audience should feel the dopamine and then feel the shame. That's sophisticated tone control. Not every drama can pull it off. Many either glamorize ruthlessness or condemn it in a way that feels fake. The sweet spot is showing ruthlessness as attractive in the moment and corrosive over time. This is also where the titles, Hidden Sword, can be interpreted as Xu Qiong's hidden desire for control. He might tell himself he's doing it for love, for protection, for survival, but there's often a sliver of ego in there too. And ego is normal. It's human. The drama becomes interesting when it doesn't deny that humanity. When it allows Xu Qiong to be both admirable and flawed. I also want to mention the idea of Simple Life as narrative closure. Closure is tricky. In power stories, closure often comes from dominance. In emotional stories, closure comes from acceptance. Acceptance is harder to dramatize. You can't film acceptance as easily as you can film a fist slam on a table. So the show needs to dramatize acceptance through choice and behavior, what Xu Qiong refuses to do, what he refuses to chase, what he stops needing. That's where little scenes matter. Not big speeches. Little choices. Saying no. Walking away. Not answering a provocation. Choosing a conversation over a confrontation. Choosing honesty over image. That's how you show transformation. And that's why I hope the drama doesn't over-rely on a single "I choose love" declaration. Those declarations are cheap if they are not backed by behavior. If Xu Qiong's final choice is love and simplicity, that's the ultimate synthesis. He uses the smartness to avoid being destroyed by the storm, and he uses the love to avoid being transformed into the storm. That's the version of the story that feels like it has a spine. Now I want to address something that might bother some fans. A drama like this can accidentally romanticize prison as a place of realness compared to the fake outside world. And while prison can produce intense bonds and clarity, it's still a cage. It's still violence and loss. So the show has to be careful not to frame prison as where he became a man in a way that glorifies suffering. Suffering doesn't make you better. It just changes you. Sometimes it makes you worse. Sometimes it makes you more aware. The drama should treat prison as a scar, not as a badge. The premise implies it does, because it emphasizes learning strategy and then facing a world of revenge and intrigue, not coming out magically strong. It's more like he comes out armed, and being armed is not the same as being whole. That distinction matters, and it's where my respect for the drama's concept comes from. It's not a fantasy of trauma as superpower. It's an acknowledgement that survival skills are double-edged. Here's a sharper critique, though, because the drama is carrying so many themes, it risks underdeveloping the business intrigue in a way that makes it feel like background noise to the emotional arc. Some viewers will be okay with that because they're here for character. Others will feel cheated because they want the intrigue to be tight and logically satisfying. Ideally, the show does both, intrigue that makes sense and character work that lands. But the truth is, many dramas struggle to write smart business maneuvers convincingly. They end up relying on vague dialogue, conveniently timed evidence, sudden reversals that feel like writer power rather than character strategy. If Pedang Tersembunyi Badai yang Bangkit leans into vagueness, it will frustrate critics. If it keeps things grounded in human motives rather than technical business specifics, it can avoid that trap. Because you don't need us to understand balance sheets, you need us to understand leverage. Leverage is emotional as much as financial. Guilt is leverage. Loyalty is leverage. Reputation is leverage. Love is leverage. Those are the currencies the show is already interested in. So it can keep business intrigue accessible by focusing on those currencies rather than technicalities. Now, I want to revisit the notion of dendam as unresolved mourning. Xu Qiong's prison time is a loss. It's a stolen chapter of life. You can't get that back. Revenge is often an attempt to make loss feel recoverable. It's an attempt to turn grief into a story with a satisfying ending. But grief doesn't resolve like that. Grief changes shape, it doesn't get fixed. So if Xu Qiong's final choice is love and simplicity, part of that choice is him accepting that the stolen years are stolen. He can't win them back by becoming rich or powerful. He can't purchase time. He can only decide what kind of man he is with the time that remains. That's a quiet kind of tragedy. It's also a quiet kind of liberation. Here's a rehook that hits the theme dead center. The storm keeps rising because everyone wants compensation for their pain. Xu Qiong's arc is about realizing compensation isn't the same as healing. Compensation is external. Healing is internal. You can get compensation and still be broken. You can get no compensation and still find peace. That's not fair. That's not comforting. That's just life. And dramas that dare to be unfair in that way often feel more honest, even if they are less satisfying on a revenge fantasy level. Now, I'm going to talk about the likely final stretch without stepping on the biggest detailed events. We know where Xu Qiong ends up conceptually, choosing love and simple life over wealth. That means, narratively, the late game must offer him wealth in a serious way. It must dangle it. It must make it feel like the logical endpoint of everything he learned from Fang Tian and everything he endured. There must be a moment where wealth represents not greed but validation. The universe saying, see? It was worth it. That's the temptation. Then, the choice to refuse wealth can't be framed as, money doesn't matter. That would be naive. Money does matter. It affects safety, comfort, options. The refusal has to be framed as, this particular money comes with a cost I refuse. That's moral specificity. And if the drama lands that specificity, if it makes us feel exactly what the cost is, then the ending becomes powerful. The cost might be the relationship. The cost might be his humanity. The cost might be becoming the kind of person who would send someone else to prison the way he was sent. The cost might be living in permanent paranoia. Whatever it is, the cost must be tangible in the emotional world. And the girlfriend's role in that final choice matters. If she is simply a symbol of simplicity, the ending feels flat. If she is a person with her own needs and boundaries, then choosing her and choosing simplicity feels like choosing mutual dignity rather than choosing an aesthetic. Now, I want to acknowledge the audience split here, because it's real. Some of you will watch this drama and think, he went to prison for love, he deserves to win everything. And that's a fair emotional reaction. But the drama's thematic ambition is to say, deserve is not a currency the world accepts. That's a brutal theme. It's also, unfortunately, true. The world doesn't pay out based on moral math. It pays out based on power. So the only way to win, in a morally coherent way, is to redefine winning. Winning becomes protecting what matters rather than collecting what glitters. And that's where simple life becomes the ultimate power move. It's the protagonist refusing to let the world dictate his definition of success. There's also a philosophical undercurrent about masculinity and pride. In many cultures, including those often depicted in dramas with prison and business intrigue, pride is a major engine. Pride keeps grudges alive. Pride keeps power struggles escalating. Pride makes people choose dominance over peace. If Xu Qiong chooses simplicity, he's also choosing humility, but not humiliating humility. Not "I'm worthless." It's the humility of accepting he can't control everything, and he doesn't need to. That's a rare arc for a male lead in a power story, and I respect it. Even if it risks alienating viewers who want him to be the storm. Here's another rehook, because this is where the story's heart becomes visible. The series dares to suggest that Xu Qiong's bravest act isn't going to prison for love. It's learning to live without needing his suffering to mean something grand. That's a hard thing. People cling to meaning because meaning makes pain feel justified. If you tell yourself, "This happened so I could become powerful," then at least the pain bought something. But if you tell yourself, "This happened, and it was unfair, and I lost years," then you have to grieve. And grief is quieter than revenge. Grief doesn't give you an enemy to punch. Grief just sits in your chest and asks you to stay alive anyway. A drama that ends with simplicity is, in a way, ending with grief. Not misery, grief. Acceptance. Living. Now, I want to talk about what didn't work as consistently, because my stance on this isn't pure adoration. The premise is strong, but execution in these multi-genre arcs often has friction. One friction point is tonal consistency. Prison scenes tend to be gritty, intimate, harsh. Business intrigue scenes tend to be sleek, cold, performative. Romance scenes tend to be warm, vulnerable. When a drama switches among those, it can feel like channel flipping if the direction doesn't create a unifying mood. The unifying mood here should be tension, specifically, the tension between vulnerability and control. If every scene, regardless of setting, carries that tension, then the genre switches feel cohesive. If some scenes become generic business talk or generic romance talk, then the cohesion breaks. Another friction point is how quickly the story moves from prison to outside conflict. Too fast, and prison becomes a gimmick. Too slow, and the outside plot feels like it starts late. The ideal pacing uses prison not just as an intro arc but as a haunting presence throughout. If the show forgets prison once he's out, it loses the emotional foundation. If it over-relies on prison flashbacks, it becomes repetitive. The sweet spot is using prison as a lens rather than a repeated plot device. I also think the show risks oversimplifying wealth as the enemy. Wealth is not the enemy. The enemy is what people will do for it, and what it does to them. If the show frames the ending as money bad, that's shallow. If it frames it as money as power bait, that's nuanced. And from what we have, I think it wants to be nuanced. The fact that it includes strategy mentorship implies it's interested in systems, not just morality. Let's talk about systems, because prison and business are both systems, and the drama's premise puts Xu Qiong at the intersection. Prison is a system that punishes. Business power is a system that rewards. But both systems can dehumanize. Prison dehumanizes by stripping autonomy. Business dehumanizes by reducing people to assets and liabilities. Xu Qiong learns to navigate dehumanization in one system, then faces it in another. That's smart thematic architecture. If the show is paying attention, it will show parallels, the hierarchy in prison and the hierarchy in business. The way alliances form. The way information is currency. The way fear is used. The way respect is demanded. The way vulnerability is exploited. Those parallels make the story feel like more than a sequence of events, it feels like a critique of how power works across contexts. And that critique feeds into the ending. Choosing simplicity is not just a romantic choice, it's rejecting the systems that force you to dehumanize yourself to survive. Now, I'm going to zoom in on a tiny acting detail that I always look for in Changed Man arcs: how the character listens. Before trauma, people listen to respond. After trauma, people listen to detect threat. Xu Qiong should, after prison and strategy training, listen like a detector. Even when someone is being kind, is scanning for inconsistencies. That scanning can be shown through eye movement, pauses, and the way he repeats phrases as if testing them. If the actor nails that, you feel the character's internal prison without a single line of dialogue explaining it. And the girlfriend character, if she's written well, will notice that listening change. She'll feel it. Because being listened to like a threat hurts, even if it's unintentional. That's the kind of intimate damage the show should explore. Not just, he has enemies. But, his nervous system became an enemy to his own relationship. Here's a rehook that shifts us toward the final thematic payoff. The drama's ending isn't supposed to make you cheer. It's supposed to make you exhale. And if you didn't realize you were holding your breath the whole time, that exhale hits like emotion. That's the kind of ending I personally love, even when it frustrates me. Because cheering endings are fun, but exhale endings are the ones that stick with you. They are the ones you think about the next day, when you're washing dishes and suddenly your brain goes, oh. He didn't win. He escaped. Now, can we talk about what simple life actually means in dramatic terms? It means reducing stimulus. It means fewer enemies. It means fewer stakes. It means smaller circles, fewer masks, more routine. Routine is underrated as healing. Routine can be boring on screen, which is why writers often avoid it. But routine can be a dramatic symbol: I am no longer living in crisis. Now, let's go back to Xu Qiong's relationship with power. Power struggles, by their nature, involve other people trying to define you. They'll call you dangerous. They'll call you unreliable. They'll call you useful. They'll call you a threat. The point is to trap you in a label. If you accept the label, you become predictable. If you reject it, you might lose leverage. So Xu Qiong has to navigate identity performance. Identity performance is exhausting. And again, that exhaustion is what makes simplicity tempting. You can see how the drama can build emotional momentum toward the ending. Each power struggle, win, costs him a piece of his ability to rest. Each business intrigue maneuver increases his paranoia. Each revenge-related temptation strengthens his anger muscle. Eventually, he realizes he's building a life that requires constant vigilance. And then the question becomes, is that life worth it? This question is not just for Xu Qiong. It's for the viewer. Because we, as viewers, often crave the thrilling life. We crave the intense life. But most of us, in real life, would hate it. We'd be miserable. We'd want to sleep. So when a drama ends with a quieter life, it's almost like it's giving the viewer permission to want peace too. And that's oddly comforting. Now, I'm going to get a bit more specific about what a satisfying final movement would feel like, without inventing plot specifics. The final movement should feel like a narrowing. The storm should peak. Xu Qiong should be offered something that seems like the culmination: wealth, influence, revenge, satisfaction, control. The offer should feel earned. It should not feel like a random decision point. It should feel like everything has been pushing him toward it. Then, there should be an emotional catalyst that reconnects him with his original value. Not in a cheesy, remember who you are, way, but in a visceral way. A moment where he feels what he's losing. A moment where he realizes the relationship is dying under the weight of the storm. A moment where he sees himself in a mirror, literally or metaphorically, and doesn't like what he sees. And then the choice happens. Not as a triumphant speech, but as a quiet refusal. No, that is heavier than any yes he's ever said. That's the kind of ending that would make me respect the show even if parts of the middle got messy. Here's another rehook, because it's the last big thematic pivot. The drama's ending isn't anti-ambition. It's anti-devotion to other people's games. Ambition is not the villain. Being owned by the game is the villain. Xu Qiong choosing simplicity is him choosing to belong to himself and to love, not to grudges and power scripts written by enemies. And now, I want to bring in one more layer: class. When a story involves prison and business power struggles, class is always in the background. Who gets punished, who gets protected, who gets second chances, who gets labeled forever. Xu Qiong's prison record will follow him socially in ways that wealthy, powerful people might never fully face. That imbalance is part of what makes business intrigue feel unfair. People with power can commit harm and call it business. People without power commit an emotional act and go to prison. That contrast is a quiet critique of the system. And it also makes the ending more poignant. Even if Xu Qiong becomes wealthy, will he ever truly be accepted? Or will he always be the ex-con in someone's mind? If acceptance is conditional, wealth doesn't bring belonging. It brings access. There's a difference. So choosing simplicity might also be choosing a space where he doesn't have to audition for respect. Where he can build a life with fewer eyes judging, fewer people rewriting his story. Again, not automatically noble, but potentially healing. Now, I'm going to move toward my overall stance, but I'm not going to snap into verdict voice too early because I want to honor the drama's complexity. My stance is mixed, leaning positive on ambition and emotional resonance, but mixed on execution consistency. I admired what it aimed for more than I loved every step it took to get there. When it's good, it's emotionally sharp. When it's weaker, it can drift into genre familiarity, standard intrigue beats, power struggle posturing, scenes that feel like they exist because the genre demands them rather than because Xu Qiong's inner world demands them. The difference between those two modes is noticeable. But the core arc, love leading to prison, prison leading to strategy mentorship, strategy leading to power entanglement, power leading to moral crisis leading to choosing simplicity, has a strong thematic through line. And I'll take a drama with a strong through line and some mess over a perfectly polished drama that has nothing to say. Here's my respectful warning to newcomers: don't start this expecting a clean revenge banquet. Start it expecting a storm you can't fully predict, and a protagonist who becomes more capable and more complicated, not more cool. Also, a note to people who bounce off slower, atmospheric scenes: this drama's best moments might be quieter than you expect. The tension is in what isn't said. It's in restraint. If you only perk up when someone slaps a table, you might miss what the show is doing. Now I'll finally give you my recommendation in a way that feels honest. If you like dramas that put character above plot fireworks, if you enjoy morally complicated protagonists, if you can handle a story that interrogates revenge rather than purely serving it, Pedang Tersembunyi Badai Yang Bangkit is worth your time. Especially if you've ever had to rebuild yourself after a life detour. Again, not comparing that to prison directly, just acknowledging the emotional metaphor, because the show's core energy is about re-entry, recalibration, and the fight to stay human in environments that reward hardness. If you're here for tight, technical business chess with crystal clear logistics and constant twists, you might find parts of it frustrating or too broad. And if you want a story that rewards sacrifice with a shiny trophy, you might find the ending direction, choosing love and simplicity over wealth, either deeply satisfying or deeply annoying depending on your taste. For me, it mostly landed as satisfying on a thematic level, even as I could imagine wishing for a bit more narrative sharpness in how the external conflicts were resolved and justified. The thing I'll remember most isn't a power move. It's the feeling of watching Xu Qiong carry two selves at once, the man who loved impulsively, and the man who learned to survive intelligently. Watching him decide which self gets to lead, that's the drama. And if you made it this far with me, you already know what I'm going to say. I'm not here to tell you this is perfect. I'm here to tell you it's alive. It has teeth. It has tenderness. It has that rare willingness to let winning look quiet. This is Bongo Gaming, and if you want more drama reviews with this kind of character and craft deep dive, you can subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.